At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, in the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name is the Voice Ogre, and let's begin. The gesture was a calculated risk rooted in bone-deep exhaustion. Kindness was a currency Grant Ashworth couldn't afford to spend. The universe possessed a peculiar talent for finding a man at his lowest, knocking him down, and then methodically stripping him of his boots. Grant knew the sting of its cold, indifferent pavement better than most. A decade ago, he'd been less a man and more a collection of sharp, angry memories. A phantom haunting the periphery of the civilized galaxy. He was a survivor of the catastrophic failure of the human Astrian Alliance. A clandestine operations program that imploded spectacularly. It ended in a storm of Astraean betrayal, a fusillade of plasma fire, and a casualty list that marched alongside him in the quiet hours before dawn. He'd eventually washed ashore on Acheron, a rain-lashed world drowning in its own lurid neon glow. The precipitation here carried the faint, acrid taste of leaking power cells, and optimism was a commodity traded only by the terminally naive. He found the boy huddled in an alley, walls darkened by years of filth and the sharp, raw scent of fear. The downpour was relentless, a cold, percussive drumming on the corrugated metal awnings above. The boy, an Astraean youth, was a study in acute angles and wide, luminous eyes that held the specific terror of a cornered animal. In those eyes, Grant saw a faint, unwelcome reflection of himself. A shared condition of being comprehensively and irrevocably screwed. But beneath the empathy he quickly suffocated, a sliver of cold logic surfaced. He saw a solution. A desperate, insane gambit. No one in their right mind would ever frisk a shivering, homeless whelp for a piece of restricted military technology. The boy was a more secure vault than any hardened lockbox in the system. Grant's shoulders moved with a weary, deliberate motion. He shrugged off his heavy synth-leather jacket, a final, tangible link to his former life. The fabric was worn, scarred, and smelled of ozone, engine grease, and cheap whiskey. Sewn into the reinforced lining of the collar, cool against his skin for so many years, was the Covenant chip. He draped the jacket over the boy's skeletal shoulders, the heavy material enveloping him. He pulled the collar tight around the kid's neck, a gesture that was almost paternal before he caught himself. The chip was far safer there than it was with him. Without a word, he turned, his worn boots splashing in the filthy runoff. He dissolved back into the labyrinthian shadows of Acheron's lowered levels, a ghost leaving a fragment of his soul with another. 10 years later, Grant was locked in a bitter physical argument with the control yoke of the Misfit, a vessel that defied traditional ship classification. It was less a product of engineering and more an amalgam of mismatched parts that maintained flight through where Grant could only assume was collective antipathy.
"Fly, you over-glorified piece of scrap!"
he snarled, his fist connecting with the dashboard in a percussive blow. Angry orange sparks erupted from a frayed conduit, peppering his knuckles. They barely felt it. The main viewport was filled with the menacing vista of the Charybdis Maw, an asteroid field that served as a tomb for countless unfortunate vessels. Grant, however, was currently treating it as a high-velocity Shalom course. Trailing him, a sleek pursuit craft from the Scarab hegemony spat incandescent bolts of superheated plasma that hissed past his cockpit, close enough to make the whole plating ping and groan. A distorted, tinny guitar riff from some long-dead Earth band, a group called Motorhead, blared from the comm speakers. It was the only frequency the ship's ancient audio system could reliably tune, a constant, abrasive soundtrack to his life.
"Your merchandise experienced a sudden and aggressive change in ownership,"
Grant grumbled to the empty co-pilot seat, wrenching the yoke hard to port.
"It's a foundational principle of interstellar commerce, you pustulant sack of grubs. Read a book." The misfit protested the maneuver with a deep, resonant groan, the sound of tortured metal pushed far beyond its intended limits. The ship was a cosmic joke. Its entire forward section was a ridiculously over-armored assault and breaching pod, a brutalist chunk of military hardware crudely welded onto the nimble frame of a smuggler's ship. The pod rendered the ship catastrophically front-heavy, making it handle less like a starship and more like a quarry stone hurled by a giant. In his line of work, cargo acquisition, asset relocation, general roguery, the pod was useless, a monument to dead weight. The manufacturer's specifications, which he'd read once out of morbid curiosity, claimed the pod could withstand an unassisted atmospheric re-entry from high orbit. Rumor whispered that the damn thing was equipped with its own powerful single-use breaching thrusters. He'd never been reckless enough to go looking for the ignition sequence. He saw his chance. A colossal oblate spheroid of iron and nickel, tumbling end over end through the debris field. Any sane pilot would have given the behemoth a wide berth enough to fit a small moon. A slow, predatory grin spread across Grant's face. "All right, girl," he cooed, patting the humming console. The surface was warm, almost alive. "Time for the patented stupid human trick." He aimed the misfit's ugly nose directly at the spinning asteroid's equator, killing the primary thrusters at the last conceivable second. Inertia carried them forward into the asteroid's considerable gravity well. The ship was caught, slingshotted around the far side with a wrenching force that sent every loose tool, forgotten ration bar, and empty stim-pack canister ricocheting through the cabin like shrapnel. The Scarab ship, its pilot lacking Grant's unique brand of suicidal ingenuity, attempted to follow. Its trajectory was off by a few crucial degrees. A trailing chunk of rock, a moonlet to the larger asteroid, intercepted it. The hegemony vessel vanished in a silent, brilliant flash of expanding gas and pulverized metal. Grant was slammed against his crash webbing, the world dissolving into a gray haze as the blood rushed out of his head. The ship shot out from behind the asteroid like a projectile from an ancient railgun. He let out a harsh, barking laugh, a pure, unthinking explosion of victorious adrenaline. For a fleeting second, he was 22 again, a cocky fleet pilot who genuinely believed he could alter the fate of the galaxy with nothing more than quick reflexes and a winning smile. The feeling evaporated as quickly as it had appeared, leaving the familiar coppery aftertaste of survival. The cynical, slumped, returned to his shoulders. He slumped back into his worn pilot seat and set a course for the smog-choked, perpetually twilight skies of Acheron. The misfit touched down on the reinforced ferrocrete of his Hab Block's rooftop landing pad with a final agonized screech of abused landing struts. The engines whined down, each rotation of the turbine sounding like a final labored exhalation. Grant rubbed a hand across his tired, stubbled face. The exhilarating thrill of the chase, already a distant memory, replaced by the profound, bone-deep weariness that was his constant companion. He was about to cycle the hatch when a vast shadow fell over the cockpit, extinguishing the lurid, omnipresent glow of the city below. He looked up. The blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice water. Descending from the permanent, toxic cloud layer was a starship. This was no clunky freighter or a corporate shuttle sleek with empty promises. This was a weapon, an instrument of war forged from what looked like solid gold and captured starlight. Its lines were elegant, its form a terrifying marriage of artistry and lethality. It moved with a silent, predatory grace that broadcast its military origins and a budget that could purchase a small solar system. Its polished, mirror-like hull reflecting the sprawling urban decay below was fascinating, terrifying, warping the garish neon signs into abstract, bleeding smears of color. It settled above his rooftop, its purpose as clear and unambiguous as a targeting laser painting his chest. This wasn't a disgruntled client or a bounty hunter looking to collect. This was the kind of trouble that rewrote galactic maps, toppled empires, and filled history books with blood and fire, and it was currently parked on his roof. The ship's ramp lowered with a hiss that was somehow both whisper-quiet and deafeningly final. A figure emerged, a perfect silhouette against the brilliant, warm light that spilled from within. As she descended the ramp, her form resolved. The sight of her was so startling it felt like a sudden drop in cabin pressure, stealing the air from his lungs. She was tall, moving with the fluid, powerful grace of a trained predator. She was clad in a form-fitting, midnight blue uniform that looked like woven darkness, a garment that was simultaneously a declaration of supreme rank and a quiet promise of extreme violence. Her features were sharp, chiseled with an unnerving intelligence, and currently hardened with quiet, merciless wrath. This was Queen Matilda of the Astraean Ascendancy. He knew it with a primal certainty, the same way a prey animal recognizes the scent of an apex predator on the wind. Behind her, a second figure emerged, a young man, tall and leanly muscled, who moved with the same disciplined, liquid grace as the Queen. In his hands, he clutched a familiar, faded piece of dark, worn synth leather, Grant's 10-year-old jacket. The young man stepped forward, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "He believed you would recognize this," he said. His voice was a smooth baritone, a strange and unsettling fusion of the formal, melodic cadence of the Astraean court and something else. A street-level cadence that was jarringly familiar. He held the jacket out. Grant's hand moved on its own, his fingers closing around the worn material. It felt heavier than he remembered, weighted down by a decade of dust and ghosts. The moment his skin made contact, a strange current went through him. It was more than a memory of a rain-soaked alley, a shivering boy and a desperate choice. It was a memory of the man he had once been, a soldier, a believer in foolish concepts like honor and duty. He glimpsed a shadow of the man he had spent a decade hiding beneath, walls of bitterness and quiet remorse. He shook his head, forcing the feeling down into the dark. "Kid?" he asked, his voice a rough rasp. His gaze shifted from the young man's face to the Queen's. His eyes, he realized with a jolt, were identical, a piercing, intelligent shade of violet. The young man, Prince Larson, offered a wry, apologetic smile. "It required some time to locate you. The device embedded in the lining was a dormant authenticator, Astraean technology, but keyed to a defunct security clearance. It was not until I achieved my majority last month that my mature royal biosignature finally activated it." Grant's stomach twisted into a cold knot. The Covenant chip, a cross-system authenticator from the failed Alliance. A program so secret its existence had been expunged from all official records, so catastrophically terminated that no one had been left alive to decommission the hardware. Once online, it began broadcasting a signal to the official Astraean Deep Space Network, seeking a security handshake. Larson continued, a flicker of regret in his eyes. The usurpers who now control the High Command detected an unauthorized royal signal originating from this primitive human sector. They did not know the source, but they dispatched their most ruthless hunters to investigate. I am afraid, Commander, that I have inadvertently led them directly to you. Grant's gaze snapped back to the Queen. Her composure was a flawless, crystalline shell, but her violet eyes burned with a desperate, furious intensity. The air between them seemed to crackle and spark, his wary, street-honed defiance grinding against her regal, unyielding pride like two tectonic plates. "You have no comprehension," she said, her voice like the chime of a crystal bell, sharp enough to cut glass, "of the chaos you have released." On board her vessel, the Sovereign, the atmosphere was one of sterile, suffocating perfection. Every surface was polished to a flawless sheen, every light source perfectly calibrated to a soft golden glow. It was the absolute antithesis of the Misfits' chaotic, lived-in, and frequently sparking reality. Matilda stood before a vast holographic map of the galaxy, her spine so straight it seemed forged from durasteel. The Scourge Syndicate financed a coup within my court, she explained, her tone clipped, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of ice. She was reciting a battle report, not describing the ruin of her life. My fleet is compromised. My loyalists have been executed or gone to the ground, according to the official Imperial News Network. I was lost in a tragic shuttle accident. She gestured with one elegant hand at the swirling star chart. I am a ghost in my own empire, a ghost being hunted by my own people, using my own resources. She turned, her piercing gaze locking onto his. I require a guide, someone untraceable, with no official existence, someone expendable, someone intimately familiar with the galactic underworld you so clearly inhabit, someone who understands the art of becoming invisible. Her stare was an appraisal, a weighing of his worth, and a direct challenge. Prince Larson's activation of your chip has made you a priority target for the Syndicate. The life you have built here, such as it is over. I am offering you an alternative. I will compensate you with a fortune that would allow you to purchase a small temperate moon and declare yourself its king. Grant let out a short, dry bark of a laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. He looked from the poised, beautiful queen to the earnest, guilt-ridden young prince. His hand tightened on the old familiar jacket he was still holding. It wasn't about the money. It was the inferno he saw blazing in her eyes. The look of a cornered predator ready to burn the entire galaxy down to reclaim her territory. It was the faint, unwelcome echo of the man that jacket represented. A man who once fought for something more than his next score. A slow, dangerous grin stretched his lips. Keep your money, Your Highness. Matilda's eyes narrowed fractionally. I'll do it, he said, the words feeling foreign and yet perfectly natural in his mouth. But this is my operation now. My ship, my rules. He held up the jacket, a silent testament to their shared, strange history. And you owe me a new jacket. His acceptance was not the capitulation of a hired hand. It was a gauntlet thrown at her feet. A challenge to her, to the Scourge, to the galaxy, and to the ghost of the man he had been. For the first time in a decade, Grant Ashworth felt something other than the dull ache of weariness. He felt the exhilarating, terrifying rush of being truly alive. The words had scarcely finished settling in the pristine, filtered air of the bridge when a klaxon shrieked, a piercing, ugly sound that was an assault on the senses. "Proximity alert!" Larson shouted from a console, his regal composure momentarily shattering. 3 contacts dropping from cloak. Scourge assassin class. On the main view screen, 3 sleek, menacingly black ships materialized from the smoggy Echeron sky, their weapon ports already glowing with a malevolent crimson energy. A barrage of plasma fire erupted, slamming into the Sovereign's shields. The massive, golden ship shuddered under the onslaught, its defenses flaring with a brilliant, blinding light, but holding firm. "Evasive maneuvers! Return fire!" Matilda commanded, her voice a sharp, cutting edge that sliced through the cacophony of the alarm. Her royal guards, clad in immaculate silver armor, moved with the flawless, synchronized elegance of a choreographed military ballet, taking up defensive positions with an air of detached professionalism. Grant saw the tactical situation in an instant. It was a classic pincer movement, a textbook trap. The capital ship, for all its firepower, was too large, too ponderous for an atmospheric dogfight in the claustrophobic vertical canyons of the city. They were a magnificent, golden target. The Scourge fighters were herding them, boxing them in for the kill. "Your way's getting us killed," he snarled, years of ingrained, dirty fighting instinct surging to the forefront. He grabbed Matilda's arm, ignoring her indignant gasp of protest. The feel of her, the solid, unyielding strength beneath the uniform, sent an unexpected jolt through him. "We're leaving!" He half-dragged, half-pulled her towards the ramp, back out onto the grimy rooftop where the misfit sat like a loyal, monumentally ugly mongrel. "What is the meaning of this, human? Unhand me!" "Saving your royal backside," he shot back, shoving her toward the ship's open cockpit hatch. "Get in!" The moment she ducked inside, she recoiled as if physically struck. The air within the cockpit was thick, a heavy, heady cocktail of odors. Hot engine grease, the bitter scent of stale coffee, and the sharp, metallic tang of an electrical short from a perpetually sparking console. A panel next to her had radiated a fierce heat, and the entire vessel vibrated with a constant, low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate deep in her bones. A mechanical groan of perpetual complaint. She took a sharp, involuntary breath, her aristocratic nose wrinkling in profound distaste. "Does this vessel operate on standard combustion?" she inquired, her voice dripping with a glacial, aristocratic disdain. "Or is it powered merely by the force of its own decay?" Before he could formulate a suitably sarcastic retort, Grant was in the pilot's seat beside her. He ripped a maintenance panel from the console, exposing a tangle of wires. He slammed two of them together. The engines roared to life with an unholy, deafening scream of protest. "Hold on to something!" he yelled over the din. And then he flew the misfits straight off the edge of the building, plunging them into the neon-drenched vertical abyss of the Acheron's urban canyons. The transition to faster-than-light travel was a violent, nauseating event. The misfit didn't slice elegantly through the fabric of space-time. It punched a ragged, brutal hole in it and dragged itself through, screaming all the way. They emerged back into real space with a gut-wrenching lurch, the silence of the cosmos a stark contrast to the cacophony of their journey. The only light came from a barren, pockmarked moon orbiting a distant, dead gas giant. "Coordinates set for the listening post," Grant grunted, his hands gently nursing the controls as the ship trembled and groaned its relief. They landed inside a cavernous, ancient hangar bay carved deep into the moon's rocky core. The facility was a relic from a forgotten war, running on failing emergency power that cast long, dancing shadows across the corroded deck plates. The moment the engines died, the claustrophobic atmosphere that had built up inside the cockpit finally erupted.
"You are reckless, impulsive, and insubordinate!"
Matilda's voice was a whip crack of ice and fury.
"You abandoned my ship, my crew!"
"Your crew was marching into a firing squad, and your very expensive ship was about to become a very explosive firework,"
he retorted, unbuckling his harness and turning to face her in the cramped space.
"Those pristine, by-the-book tactics of yours might look impressive on a parade ground, but down here in the mud, they get you a neatly ceremonial burial."
"I am a master strategist. I have conquered entire systems with less."
"Congratulations! I'll nominate you for a medal!"
He sneered, his face inches from hers. The cockpit was too small for a proper confrontation.
"But you are not in your pristine system anymore, Queenie. You're in my world now. And in my world, we don't stand on ceremony while the other guy is lining up a killing shot."
They were nose to nose, chest to chest, her incandescent, regal fury smashing against his raw, street-forged intensity. The small space was thick with the scent of adrenaline, residual anger, and something else. Something potent and volatile that neither of them dared to acknowledge. Later, Larson found his mother pacing the derelict station's dimly lit command center. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and she radiated waves of palpable frustration. He listened with quiet patience as she recounted, in excruciating detail, every single one of Grant's infuriating, chaotic, unpredictable, and undeniably effective actions. When she finally fell silent, her breathing heavy, Larson tilted his head, a thoughtful, analytical expression on his face. "Mother," he said calmly, his tone that of a scholar presenting a fascinating, if unorthodox, thesis. "I have been studying the cultural data I was able to extract from the Covenant chip, based on my analysis of ancient Earth customs, particularly the pre-Exodus North American courtship rituals. I believe Commander Ashworth has just expressed his profound respect and admiration for you." Matilda stopped pacing. She stared at her son, baffled.
"You what? The proposal is tactically unsound. It is, in a word, insane,"
Matilda stated, her voice flat and final. They were huddled around a flickering holographic tactical table in the station's command center. Their resources were, to be generous, non-existent. They were blind, running on the dregs of their fuel cells. Situations this far gone don't respond to sound tactics. They require a dose of glorious, full-throttled insanity, Grant countered, jabbing a grime-stained finger at the holographic display. The Stardust Gala on Ophion. It's a premier social event of the season for every high-level piece of scum in this quadrant. Arms dealers, corporate spies, scourge dignitaries, they all flock there to preen and posture. If we need actionable intelligence, that's the Viper's nest we need to kick.
We will be recognized instantly. The security will be insurmountable.
Exactly. It's the last place in the entire galaxy anyone would expect a fugitive queen and her pet human to show up. As they argued, the specifics of the plan blurring into a heated, circular debate about tactics versus acceptable risk, Larson turned to Grant, his expression one of earnest, academic curiosity. "Commander," he began, his tone serious and scholarly, "on Earth, how does a male typically signal romantic interest in a female with whom he respects on both a strategic and a personal level?" Grant didn't even look up from the map, his mind still cycling through combat scenarios and an escape route. "Huh? Where I come from, when you really like someone, you argue with them. A lot, preferably at high volume. It is a way of showing that you care enough to fight. It's completely backward. It's an idiotic system, but for some reason, it seems to work." He turned back to the tactical map, pointing at an entry point he'd identified. "You see, if we go through the service corridors here..." He was completely oblivious to the sudden, charged silence that he had descended upon the room. Larson shared a brief, meaningful look with his mother. Matilda's face was a stunning, complex masterpiece of conflicting emotions. Incandescent fury, profound disbelief, and a dawning, horrified comprehension that was slowly painting her high cheekbones a faint but distinct shade of crimson. Grant Ashworth, the single most infuriating, insubordinate, and maddening man she had ever met, hadn't just been arguing with her. He had been, by his own cultural's ridiculous, primitive standards, flirting with her. Preparing for a high society gala on a derelict, half-powered moon base required a certain level of creative problem-solving. Larson, with his innate technological aptitude, managed to coax the station's ancient, sputtering fabricator into producing clothing that was, if not fashionable, at least passably formal. Grant emerged from the fresher unit, scrubbed clean of a week's worth of engine grease and grime. He tugged at the uncomfortably stiff collar of a sharp black tuxedo. The suit fit him well, the tailored lines hinting at the soldier's physique he normally concealed under loose-fitting smuggler's gear. It looked less like a scoundrel, and more like a government-sanctioned assassin who had just been activated for a high-stakes mission. He stopped dead in his tracks when Matilda entered the room. She wore a gown of dark, silken material that seemed to drink the dim light, clinging to her form like liquid midnight. It was a garment of elegance, yet Grant's trained eye could detect the subtle, telltale microwave of armored plating in the fabric. It was a dress designed to command a ballroom and survive a battlefield. She was breathtaking. She was lethal. She was every inch a queen. They stood there for a long, charged moment, the low hum of the station's failing life support the only sound in the cavernous room. The air between them was thick with 1,000 unspoken words. Larson cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. "In Australian high culture," he said, his voice meticulously neutral as he addressed a suddenly very confused Grant, "prolonged, unbroken eye contact in a non-combat situation is considered a formal declaration of mating interest. I felt it was pertinent information you should possess." Matilda shot her son a look that could have melted a bulkhead, but the blush on her cheeks deepened, a stark, beautiful contrast to her otherwise icy composure. Grant just blinked, his brain stuttering as it attempted to process this new, terrifying piece of cross-cultural data. The Stardust Gala on Ophion was a full-frontal assault on the senses. A dissonant symphony of alien music pulsed through the air. mingling with a dizzying array of exotic perfumes. The vast ballroom glittered with the light reflecting off of jewels and false smiles of the galaxy's most powerful and corrupt elite. Grant, fully inhabiting his role as a boorish, newly rich arms dealer from some forgotten backwater system, was in his element. It was loud, obnoxious, swaggering, and utterly convincing. While loudly and profanely complaining about the quality of the champagne to a pompous scourge dignitary, he saw it from the corner of his eye. A wealthy, preening Orionite noble had cornered a young Astraean server girl, his body language aggressive, his voice a low, cruel hiss. The girl's posture was rigid with terror. Grant's carefully constructed hard shell vanished. The boorish slouch was gone, replaced by the coiled, predatory stillness of a soldier assessing a threat. His eyes, moments before jovially crinkled, went flat and cold. Matilda, observing him from across the crowded room, saw the transformation. The sudden shift from clumsy oaf to lethal weapon was both terrifying and strangely electrifying. With a movement that looked like a clumsy, drunken stumble, Grant lurched sideways, bumping into a passing service droid. The droid's tray tilted, and colorful, sticky cocktails drenched the abusive Orionite noble from his coiffed head to his polished boots. In the ensuing chaos of sputtered apologies from Grant and outraged shrieks from the Orionite, the server girl slipped away into the crowd, unharmed. To everyone else in the room, the incident was a buffoonish, if amusing, mistake. Matilda was the only one who recognized the lethal, calculated motion in the accident. It was the first time she hadn't just seen the cynical smuggler or the reckless pilot. For a brief, unguarded moment, she saw the protector, the warrior. And in the middle of the distraction he'd masterfully created, Larson, moving like a silent shadow through the throng, deftly lifted the Scourge dignitary's encrypted data slate. Their cover, as was inevitable, failed to last. The facial recognition scan finally registered a positive match in the fugitive queen, and the elegant gala erupted into a frantic firefight. Plasma bolts, brilliant streaks of destructive energy seared the air, incinerating priceless alien sculptures and sending terrified socialites diving for cover. They escaped in a stolen, top-of-the-line luxury sky skiff, Grant at the controls, weaving them through the chaotic, multi-leveled sky lanes of Ophion with a reckless, joyful abandon. Matilda was in the passenger seat, firing a heavy plasma rifle back at their pursuers, each shot placed with a cold, deadly accuracy of a master marksman. The stray shot from a Scourge fighter got through their defenses, grazing her arm. The armored weave of her gown held, preventing a serious wound, but the expensive fabric tore. Grant saw her wince, her jaw tight with pain. He'd insisted on wearing his old, battered synth-leather jacket over the tuxedo. "For luck," he'd grunted when she'd questioned the fashion choice. "Did you just ruin your only piece of formal attire to attend to a minor scratch?" Matilda asked. Her voice was tight with a mixture of pain and disbelief as he shrugged the jacket off with one hand, never taking his eyes off the sky lanes ahead. "It's not formal attire, it's multi-purpose tactical gear," he shot back, ripping a long strip off the tough, worn material of the sleeve. "Now hold still." Leaning across the console, completely ignoring the plasma fire whizzing past the canopy, he expertly wrapped the strip of synth leather around her bleeding arm, pulling it tight into a makeshift pressure bandage. The unhesitating intimacy of the act, the feel of his rough, calloused hands on her skin, silenced her more effectively than any argument ever could. The tough, utilitarian human fabric starkly contrasted her elegant, damaged gown, a perfect, jarring metaphor for the two of them. The sky skiff was dying, trailing a plume of black smoke and leaking atmosphere at an alarming rate. They limped back to the moon, back to the derelict station and the patiently waiting misfit. "They'll be scanning all energy signatures in this sector," Grant said, his voice tight with concentration as he guided the crippled skiff into the hangar. "We need to go dark, completely dark." He powered down every non-essential system on the misfit, plunging the ship into a deep, consuming silence and darkness. Larson immediately went to the cockpit, plugging the stolen data slate into the ship's main computer interface. "I require more processing power to break this encryption," he called out from the cockpit, his fingers a blur across the holographic control. It's military grade, layered with quantum locks, rerouting all non-essential power. I'm cutting inertial dampeners and artificial gravity. Life support to minimum for 60 seconds. Brace yourselves. In the cargo bay, Grant and Matilda were working on a temporary patch for a minor hull breach sustained during the firefight. One moment, they were standing on the solid, graded floor. The next, the floor was simply gone from beneath them. The artificial gravity generator sputtered, whined, and died. They floated. The sudden, disorienting silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. A 60-second countdown clock on a nearby console was the only source of light, its stark red glow painting their body and their faces in bloody hues. They drifted in the zero-gravity environment, surrounded by a slow-motion cloud of floating tools and debris. Through the main viewport, the swirling, breathtaking vista of the cosmos was laid bare. The residual adrenaline from the chase, the shared danger, the ticking clock on the very air supply, it all conspired to finally shatter the last vestiges of their carefully maintained control. He reached for her, his movements slow and deliberate in the weightless void. His hand found her waist, his grip firm, pulling her closer through the floating debris. His touch was not gentle or questioning. It was raw, honest, and stripped of all pretense. She did not pull away. She responded with a controlled but overwhelming intensity, as if a dam of regal composure she had maintained for her entire life had finally, catastrophically, broken. It was a weightless, frantic embrace in the silent darkness, a collision of two disparate worlds set adrift among the stars. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her grip surprisingly strong. His other hand slid from her waist to the small of her back, pressing her body against his. It was a desperate, hungry release of all the unspoken tension that had been simmering between them since the first meeting on the rooftop, fueled by borrowed time and the proximity of death. They pulled apart, breathless and shaken, their foreheads resting against each other in the darkness as the console clock hit 0. The ship systems hummed back to life with a gentle thrum. "Grant," she whispered, his name a foreign yet wonderful sound on her lips. Before he could answer, Larson's voice, grim and strained, crackled over the internal comm system. "Mother, Commander, I have broken the encryption." The spell was shattered. It is worse than we imagined," Larson said, his voice tight with a horrified disbelief. "It details a Scourge superweapon, codename World Ender. It is a planetary-scale energy weapon, and its primary target is Astrea Prime. The traitor fleet is scheduled to rendezvous with it and lower the planetary shields. The attack is scheduled to commence in less than 20 standard hours." The jump to the Astraean system was the most violent transit the Misfit had ever endured. The ship screamed in protest, every plate and wire groaning under the immense strain of a full-throttle, max-power FTL burn that pushed its ancient drive core to the brink of catastrophic failure. They emerged back into real space with a bone-jarring lurch that threw them all hard against their restraints. The sight that greeted them was a waking nightmare made manifest. The Scourge fleet was dropping out of hyperspace, a swarm of black, angular warships that seemed to absorb the light of a nearby star. And at its center, a colossal, terrifying vessel that blotted out constellations, the World Ender. It was less a ship and more a weapon with engines bolted on as an afterthought. Its bow was dominated by a massive focusing array that pulsed with a sickening greenish-yellow energy. Matilda's face radiated a quiet, dangerous intensity. She opened an emergency all-channels broadcast frequency, her voice ringing out across the system, cutting through the Scourge's encrypted communications and reaching every loyalist ship and station in rage. This was no desperate plea for help. It was a declaration of war. She exposed the traitors by name, her words like blades of plasma, and called her people to arms. Then, her voice took on an ancient, formal, and resonant tone, a cadence of pure command.
By the power vested in me as the Queen of the Astraean Ascendancy, I hereby name this human, Grant Ashworth, my shield and my champion. He speaks with my voice. His command is my command. Obey him as you would obey me, or be branded as traitors and erased from the memory of our people for all time.
A small squadron of loyalist fighters, hopelessly outnumbered, had already scrambled from a hidden base to meet them. Now they had a commander sanctioned by their queen with the most sacred and binding of royal vows. A commander who was, by all appearances, completely and utterly insane.
All right, you magnificent bastards, listen up.
Grant's voice crackled over the comms to the stunned Astraean pilots.
We're not winning a fair fight today, so we are not going to fight fair.
The battle was joined. It was a slaughter. The loyalist fighters were skilled, their pilots courageous, but they were gnats trying to halt a hurricane. The World Ender was protected by an impenetrable energy shield, powered by a massive external generator array located on the dorsal spine of the main Scourge dreadnought.
I'm going for the generator,
Grant stated, his voice a calm, steady point in the swirling chaos of battle.
Champion, that is a suicide run.
One of the Astraean flight leaders protested over the comm.
Yeah, well, I'm feeling suicidal,
Grant shot back, banking the misfit hard and accelerating directly into the thickest part of the firefight. Plasma fire rained down on him, splashing harmlessly against his overworked, groaning shields. He weaved and dodged, flying on pure, unthinking instinct, pushing the rust bucket ship far beyond any reasonable operational limit. A Scourge fighter latched onto his tail, its pilot skilled enough to match his every erratic move.
Come shake this guy,
he growled, sweat beading on his forehead and trickling into his eyes. He thumbed the weapon's controls. A red light glowed on his console. The system refused to arm, a common, infuriating glitch that occurred whenever he was pulling too much power for the engines and shields simultaneously.
Damn it!
On a pure, frustrated impulse, he slammed his fist down hard on the dashboard. At the exact same moment, he yelled at the ship's rudimentary computer.
Divert auxiliary power to the port thruster, now!
The ship lurched violently to the left as the thruster overloaded, a move no sane flight computer would ever recommend or even allow. The sudden, violent lurch threw his pursuer's aim completely off, sending a volley of plasma bolts sizzling harmlessly into empty space. The physical shock of the punch, however, had another unintended effect. It jolted the sticky weapon relay switch loose. A green light blinked to life on the console, weapons armed. He grinned, a feral, vicious thing.
Thanks for the love tap, girl.
He flipped the misfit end over end, a high-G maneuver that should have torn the ship's frame apart, and blew the pursuing Scourge fighter into a cloud of superheated, expanding vapor. His intimate, hands-on knowledge of his ship's every flaw and foible had just become a lethal weapon. Grant's insane, suicidal charge was the distraction they desperately needed, while the bulk of the Scourge fleet focused on the single, chaotic human ship that was causing disproportionate havoc in their disciplined ranks. A small, heavily armored boarding craft detached from the Misfits' underbelly. Using the chaos as cover, Matilda and Larson led a small, elite strike team. Their craft latched onto the Scourge command dreadnought like a remora, and they burned their way through the hull with plasma cutters. On the bridge, Matilda came face to face with the architect of her suffering. Chrome and engineered flesh merged in the Scourge Overlord, his expression hidden behind a smooth, emotionless metal surface.
The biological stain,
the Overlord rasped, his voice a synthesized, condescending sneer.
You should have remained a martyr.
I have returned to sanitize my kingdom, Matilda replied, igniting the shimmering plasma edges of her ceremonial staff, transforming it into a deadly weapon. They clashed. It was a spectacular duel, a breathtaking dance of death. Sparks flew as his energized claws met her plasma staff, the bridge of his own command ship becoming their personal arena. While his mother engaged the Overlord, Larson broke away from the main firefight, racing towards the ship's engineering section. His goal was to sabotage the World Ender's main firing system from its command source on the Dreadnought. He found the primary control terminal, but a squad of Scourge guards rounded the corner, laying down a heavy curtain of covering fire that pinned him down behind a bulkhead. He couldn't reach the physical controls. He was out of time and out of options. His formal Astraean tactical training offered no solution to this impasse, but he had the data slate. He ducked low, connecting the stolen Scourge slate to his own wrist comp. Frantically, his fingers danced across the holographic interface, sifting through layers of encrypted enemy code. A memory surfaced in his mind, Grant on the Misfit, slamming two wires together to force the engine to start. It wasn't about breaking the system. It was about tricking the system into breaking itself. He found it, a maintenance backdoor, a diagnostic protocol designed to test the weapon's power conduits. By flooding them with a controlled energy surge, it was protected by a dozen redundant safety overrides. Larson didn't disable them. He amplified them. It was a victory of wits, not weapons. He wrote a simple, elegant, and utterly malicious line of code. It triggered the diagnostic and simultaneously convinced the system the resulting power surge was a catastrophic failure. A failure that required an even greater surge to correct. He created a feedback loop. That was stupid. It was chaotic. It was a very Grant-like solution. That was perfect. He hit execute. Matilda drove her staff through the Overlord's chest cavity, silencing his synthesized monologue for good. But she was trapped. His elite guards swarmed the bridge, cutting off her only escape route. She fought with the desperate ferocity of a cornered lioness, but she was outnumbered, her energy reserves fading fast. High above the raging battle, Grant, his ship battered and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen small breaches, finally reached the generator. He unleashed every last weapon the Misfit possessed. A final, desperate volley of missiles and cannon fire that overloaded the array. The Dreadnought's shields, and with them, the shields of the World Ender, flickered, sparked, and died. The superweapon was vulnerable, but instead of pulling away to safety, Grant did something no sane person would ever do. He looked at the mangled, sparking console, at the flashing red light for the emergency cockpit separation system. He looked down at the Varian Dreadnought's bridge, a tiny, insignificant window in a vast sea of black metal.
Time to test out the manufacturer's warranty.
He gritted out between clenched teeth. He found the sequence that he was looking for on a dusty, forgotten submenu. Emergency separation, breaching thruster ignition. The cockpit, the ridiculous, over-engineered assault and breaching pod, detached from the rest of the dying Misfit with a bone-jarring, deafening roar. The single-use thrusters fired. A controlled, directional explosion of pure, raw power that launched the pod like a cannonball fired from the hand of a vengeful god, straight at the command ship's bridge. It punched through the armored viewport in an apocalyptic shower of pulverized transparasteel and twisted metal. Grant, bleeding from a dozen cuts, his left arm hanging uselessly at his side, stumbled out of the wreckage of his own cockpit. He was running on nothing but raw adrenaline and an insane, desperate need to get to her. He saw Matilda, stunned and surrounded amidst the chaos. He fired his sidearm at the guards, the plasma bolts finding their marks with deadly accuracy. He grabbed her, his touch urgent and possessive.
Larson, now!
He yelled into his comm. He leapt with her from the shattered, burning bridge. A terrifying, gravity-assisted fall towards the extraction shuttle that Larson had brought screaming up alongside the drying Dreadnought. They landed hard on the ramp just as the feedback loop Larson had initiated finally chain-reacted. The entire Scourge Dreadnought detonated behind them in a glorious, silent fireball that lit up the dark side of Estrella Prime like a newborn sun. The ground on Estrella Prime was a scene of wild, ecstatic celebration. The Scourge fleet was broken and scattered, the traitors in custody. Amid the cheering crowds and her returning royal court, Queen Matilda, regal and composed despite the grime and scorch marks of battle, strode through the grand plaza of the capital. Her eyes scanned the crowd and found Grant. He was leaning against the ramp of their shuttle, battered, bleeding, but alive. It looked like hell. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She walked straight up to him, and in front of the entire court, her people, and the assembled galactic press, she pulled him into a deep, passionate kiss that silenced the entire plaza. It was a kiss of gratitude, of victory, and long-suppressed want. The aged royal advisor's face twisted with disbelief as he struggled to find words.
Your Majesty, this is against all protocol. He's an alien, a commoner.
Matilda held up one hand, cutting him off without breaking her intense, burning gaze from Grant's. "Protocol is for peacetime, Counselor," she said, her voice ringing with the absolute, unshakable authority of a queen who had just taken back her throne. "This man is war personified, and we won." Later, in the quiet solitude of her private chambers, the adrenaline had finally faded, leaving a profound, simmering intimacy in its place. She gently tended to his wounds, her touch careful and sure, the witty banter, the sarcastic barbs, the constant friction, and was all gone, replaced by a comfortable, easy silence. He had given her son a jacket in the rain, a small, desperate act of survival that had, through a bizarre twist of fate, led him here. In return, he had saved her world. And now she was giving him a home, purpose, a permanent official place by her side. And as she leaned in to kiss him again, slowly this time, a permanent, very unofficial place in her bed, he felt the exhilarating, terrifying rush of being truly alive. The rush carried them through hell, a storm of her regal fire and his human chaos that scoured the scourge from the stars. In the quiet of her private chambers, the sounds of a city celebrating its queen were a distant murmur. He sat on the edge of an ornate chase, stripped to the waist, while Matilda herself carefully cleaned a deep gash on his arm. The silence was no longer a battlefield of wills, but a comfortable quiet, thick with unspoken things. He watched her, the focused intensity in her violet eyes, the gentle, precise movements of her royal hands. This was the same woman who had executed the flawless zero-gravity boarding action and dueled a cyborg monster on the bridge of his own ship. "My people build starships that are perfect," she said, her voice losing its sharp edge for the first time. "They're logical, flawless. They function until they fail, and then they are discarded." She paused, dabbing a cleansing antiseptic on his skin, and he didn't even flinch. She met his gaze, and her eyes held a universe of newfound wonder. You take a broken thing, a ship that runs on little more than spite and a prayer, and you don't just fix it. You curse at it, you kick it, you slam your fist on its console, and somehow... She shook her head, a small, incredulous smile touching her lips. "You bully it back to life." He caught her hand, his own calloused and scarred, and brought her knuckles to his lips. "It's a foundational principle of being human, Your Highness," he murmured against her skin, his grin slow and genuine. "We don't give up on our junk. We break it better." As he pulled her into a kiss that tasted of victory and love, she knew her perfect logical empire was safe. It was now anchored to the most gloriously, beautifully imperfect, and utterly indomitable force the galaxy had ever known: humanity.